AI, it's everywhere. It's a topic on everyone's lips. W&A have been recruiting into the accountancy and finance markets for more than 20 years, and it's hard to recall a theme that has created so much debate. In recruitment, we need to be at the forefront of both talent and skills, and it's safe to say that AI is undoubtedly beginning to shape the future of both. So is the hype real? Is the advancement of AI in the workplace as rapid as some predicted? What does the accountant of tomorrow's remit look like, and what could you be doing to future-proof your skills? In W&Ai, we hear from industry leaders and experts about the opportunities and risks that AI present, and importantly, what are the finance use cases and pitfalls. I'm Ross, we're W&A, and this is W&Ai. Yeah, and it's interesting you mention automation in particular, because in my experience of recruitment and speaking to sort of hiring managers and the like, automation, around for many years, and seemed to be absolutely embraced, and the sort of the use cases endless, whereas maybe the risks not quite as broadly spoken about in terms of some of the risks to AI, and perhaps that's just because AI is in our daily lives now in the way that automation might not be in terms of individual usage of it. What would you sort of determine being the main differences, Sean, between sort of automating a process versus AI having some sort of bearing on the process?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. I think there's different levels of maturity, and as you mentioned, automation's been around for a while, and as Jaci's mentioned as well, not everything needs to be hammered with that AI hammer. So I think there's levels of, ultimately we're dealing with digital systems here, so it's actually like, how can I move from X to Y to Z to get something done, for example, or do I even need X, Y to Z? Can I just go to X to Z, for example? So I think it's thinking about what you're actually trying to automate and how you actually do that. And I think if we use the data example, so you've got potentially a field that you want or some data to come from a client, for example, and you need that to get into system here, and then you need to do something with that and get an output from that. So, you potentially don't need AI for that. It's a case of, instead of doing it manually, you might go, okay, I can link into that system. I can move it through this system, do some processing on it, do some checks on it, and get an output, for example. Great. That's really good. But actually, you might go, actually, there's still levels of, maybe I need to interpret that, I need to check, does it fit with these parameters, those types of things. And again, you may be starting to get into more judgment. So actually, how can I grade that, for example, or understand, highlight any issues with that. So I think that's there's the various elements of feeding that into that particular process. And then ultimately it comes to, okay, well, I'm a human in this process, right? What value am I adding to that particular process? And then I think that's where AI comes into it. So I think either using AI as the the reviewer, the initiator of something to help that process, for example, to come up with ideas or to generate the code, for example. I think that's when it starts. There's an extra level of AI to help that automation process and move it along. And then I think there's the level of actually the whole automation process itself, as Jaci's already mentioned. Is there a different way of doing that? And you're into an extra level of full review of that particular process. So for me, I think it's about maturity and grades, and looking at actually what you're trying to automate. Is there the digital processes, the data process that already exists to try and make this better? And then actually think, right, how does AI help with each of those individual steps, or something, a more fundamental review of it? So that's kind of my perspective. And again, that's what we're seeing working at the moment. So
one, I think, a framework that I've seen for that kind of thing that works quite well is just to optimize, scale, reinvent tiering. So optimize being, I've got something I've got today. How do I do that better, quicker, faster, more efficient? Which again, it doesn't have to be AI or not. Now there's certain things that you can now do which you couldn't do before because of some of these capabilities. So you would say, I've got this process and I optimize it. Now, once you've optimized one thing, how can you scale that? So it's not just one thing, it's hundreds of things, or it's more efficient. Now, what tends to happen when you do that? It creates, what should create, efficiency and capacity creation as well. So once you get to that level, you can then actually look at, well, how do I reinvent? So How do I complete that? How do I do this in a completely different way, end to end? And I think it's that reinvention stage where you could have pretty transformational impact and change as well. So really the objective should be to move from optimize to reinvent, but you can try jump straight, but I think my personal experience has been, I haven't seen many big bang programs that have worked first time round and have not gone massively over budget. And I think even if you think about like, certain big kind of government-led programs as well, certain railway comes to mind. But, it's very, very, very rare that you see something like Big Bang go to that kind of massive thing to kind of get it right first time in budget. So so kind of going up through the stages, I think, is a good way of doing it as well. But like I say, there's certain things that we can do now that we couldn't do before. But, just try do what you do now a lot better, then scale it, and then look at kind of completely doing it in a new way.
Yeah. So I spoke at our insolvency practitioner conference last year and just worked through some, I'm not from that background, so I was working with our colleagues who know that industry very, very well. But for example, an insolvency case, the practitioner will, capture lots of different documents, lots of things in emails, lots of, potentially spreadsheets, lots of other documents. And that's quite a manual process. Set the case up, get going on that, and really understand what they need to do and do a quick evaluation of that. And so I was showing some examples, obviously using some of the out of the box tools about the ability to quite quickly analyze that and collect the data together. Obviously, but the human going, right, okay, does that make sense, and go with that. So you were saving days worth of work literally into minutes and going through that process. Now that'll be a very manual process. You might be very directive and say, right, I'll load that one up, right, I'll check that one and go through that particular process. But you can imagine then you're going, okay, well, I've done that a few times now. Can I actually set up something more systematic to go, actually, I know the process now. I know what I'm looking for. I'm comfortable with how it's working. So potentially I could set up my prompt or my agent, whatever you want to use, to say, actually, I now know these documents look like this. I know to structure the data this way. I know what checks and balances I need in place to make sure that I'm very comfortable with that. And here's the general outputs I need from that. I might need a very quick summary. I might need to know, get a look at some of the financials, for example. I might need to create some comms to, whoever's involved in the creditors, for example, give them a quick update on things. So you can kind of see quite quickly you're as Jaci says, you're moving from actually optimization into more semi-structured automation, almost going, right, I've got that bit sorted, right, I can put a check and balance in there, I can move through to the next stage. So there's some really practical things you could do with no technical training, just a bit of training in the tools and work that through. So
I mean, that's really encouraging, isn't it, for people generally to think that there can be that, because that's a meaningful impact, isn't it, with relatively minimal input, with no disrespect to that process.
Yeah, no, and think, there's not a lot of IPs exist, in certainly in Scotland these days, and a lot of them can be working individually or very small teams. So actually helping them work through that process is really impactful to that, for example, that sector there. So
I mean, I'm fascinated by just how skills are evolving in relation to it. In our job in recruitment, it's fundamental that we know what skills are applicable to jobs, and how people might be able to help navigate their career by building skills in certain disciplines, and clearly this is emerging. I think you made the point, Jaci, it's not going anywhere, and you've both alluded to this maybe without saying it directly, but I think we have to embrace it, but in the right sort of responsible, in the right responsible way. What are I guess sort of advising in terms of the skills of tomorrow for CAs, perhaps for students currently, Sean, in relation to, I guess, the adoption of AI, and will it become, is it part of syllabus, for example, and actually just how the theoretical side might evolve as they're training?
No, it's a really good question, and we have enhanced our syllabus, particularly around data analytics and generative AI as well. It's a core skill, and as well as our CPD as well. So that and all the other bodies are doing the same. Obviously, we know it's important skills to work that through. So I think that's important. I think we've touched on this before. I think it's that that's that element of, you know, what is an accountant, you know, that professional judgment, that analysis, that, you know, looking at the bigger picture and working that through and being able to challenge and work through things. So that skill set's never going to go away in terms of accountancy, but it is more that you know, that day-to-day skills, that automation, you know, that analysis things that we can effectively accelerate. I mean, that you know, there's some the press out there, some challenges to the accountancy profession, but you know, I think it's really, really exciting. I think to come into the profession now, I think, you know, if we can take away more of that, you know, the simpler tasks, potentially the more mundane tasks that exist in accountancy, I think that'll give, you know, the folk coming into accountancy more time to, you know, get involved in the things that, you know, maybe more inspire them and add value to that actual process. So I think it's really, really exciting. And I've a personal opinion. I've you know, I've worked with different teams through the years, but finance is a great team to work with because they rely on data, and they make a big impact in all organizations they work in. So actually, as a profession, you know, it's a really good profession to understand technology and data and actually see how new tools can help with that analysis process and with that planning process and that challenge process. So I think they're actually primed more than maybe, say, the legal profession, maybe more than the medical profession, actually, to really embrace these tools and make a big impact. So, but yeah.
So my advice to people also would be is, you know, be a lifelong learner. And you know, that goes in many aspects. Not clearly currently everyone's clamoring after, you know, what's the next AI course or something that I can do. And I would also just caution people as well, just be very careful of what you, especially kind of very expensive paid courses. I think in the same way that people have, you know, you're seeing a big push of AI products and tools. There's also been a big explosion of kind of paid for AI courses. You know, some are better than others, so you know, make sure you kind of
be cautious.
Be cautious. Like, and I'm not at all implying that they're all bad.
Of course.
Just, you know, do your due diligence. But the other thing I would say is, you try do kind of personal learning for things that are appropriate and relevant to your sphere of influence. You know, several years ago, before I started looking at all of this, the best £15 I ever spent was doing it was a Udemy course actually at that stage on Power Query, because, you know, I was doing a process. It was very reliant on Excel in that case, and I just thought, there must be some way in Excel that I can do this at scale and automate it a bit more. And then found, you know, again, personal learning, you know, kind of searching about, there's this thing in Excel called Power Query, which I wasn't familiar with at that stage. Found a course that just did a kind of a very practical how-to thing, and it absolutely transformed the way that I worked in that example. Now, the point I want to make is, if in your work or in your BU, kind of part of a big organization or sole practitioner, if you're making use of tools, make sure that you're actually versed in the tools that you are using as well, because these things, especially now, are evolving quite quickly. So take the time to actually learn and be proficient at the tooling that you have. You know, so stay curious in that sense, but also try look at it from a slightly more global or kind of high level perspective, because it's not just about the tool, it's about the kind of the big picture. What's objective? How do you want this thing to hang together as well?
I think the lifelong sort of learner point is fundamental, isn't it? I think particularly if these tools are going to continue to evolve at the rate that they are, you can imagine your knowledge going out of date quite quickly if you're not sort of continually learning. You would think. The really interesting point that you make just around that as a concept and how things might evolve, because we have seen, I guess, and even in recruitment, if you think for recruitment CRM, lots of different CRMs have now got sort of AI companions in them.
That's right.
You know, and if I think of that, and you made a good point about reconciliations, and Sean, I think you made a point about the month-end close. With sort of, for example, ledger software having sort of AI built in to it. In that scenario, the accountability might partly rely with information that's going into the ledger and the flow of data going in, but also potentially the vendor, as you say, of the ledger software itself. I can imagine that being quite a contentious point, for businesses and practitioners. Is that something that you would sort of ward against, just sort of too much AI in and around your finance processes, particularly something like that off the shelf?
So what I would say is, I want to really be not careful, but I want to kind of make sure that I give the appropriate response to this. So I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, don't use it. One of the principles I try to go with is, when it comes to data, so where's data residency? So where's your ledger data? So it will save you a lot of hassle, a lot of time, and probably keep you safer if you make your source of data more intelligent, if you want to call it. So if there are things that are native in the space that you work, try keep it there, as opposed to moving data massively from one place to another, because that's got a whole bunch of other complications and issues, and then reconciliations, all that kind of stuff. So if you're making use of an accounting software that holds your data and it starts to provide some of these functionalities and tools, I would not discourage people from actually seriously considering and looking what they provide. However, you need to be very clear in understanding of what this thing actually is and is not, and what it is doing. Now, the questions you would ask for that and the way you would approach it will very, very much depend in the context you find yourself in. So if you are a small practice or a sole practitioner and you're making use of accounting software, you have high reliance on that software probably as it is, and you only have. It's not that you're limited on choice, but you probably don't want that much choice as well, because again, you don't want fragmentation of tooling and then kind of differences between the different things as well. You might want to introduce some new tools. That's absolutely fine, but just be kind of conscious of what the implications of that might be. If you're part of a larger organization, and because when you come to scale, there are different kind of considerations as well. So, for example, at NatWest, whenever we introduce or look at introducing third-party tools, there is a third-party surveyor questionnaire that we get them to fill in, but it doesn't incorporate, especially when it comes to the AI bit of it, we do need to understand things like, you're making use of my data, what are you doing with that data as well? And if it's an AI component, where's the data going and what's being done with it from an AI perspective? So what I mean with that is, imagine I contract with Sean, he's the third party for me. I give him my data, I use his tools to do something that I use. But in the background, you want to make sure that Sean doesn't actually then say, well, he's outsourced his AI stuff to you.
Yeah.
And so Ross, so then it's actually, there's a kind of, almost kind of fourth hand, if you want to call it, but then that you might be retraining your models and on the information that I've given to Sean. So my contract with Sean, but unknowingly there's actually a tangential relationship that I'm not aware of. Again, it very much depends on context, but depending on your context, depending on the kind of data that you're using, you need to be aware of that as well. That you don't have kind of leakage or data issues through the back door as well, because the last thing you want to see is your data being used or your client information kind of resurfacing somewhere else. But like I say, that very, very, very much depends on your individual context.
Yeah, and I guess just really practically, again, a small firm thinking, right, okay, God, where do I check all that stuff? You potentially could get the terms and conditions of your software and feed it into some of your tools. And actually ask the W&Ai tools, like, tell me more about this. You think this is a bit overwhelming. Yeah. So I think there's different ways to approach it. Obviously big orgs will have specialists and people in these things, but smaller teams might just go, right, actually take the terms and conditions and do some research on it, and you can quite quickly find, potentially some of these issues.
Yeah. And don't be scared to ask your providers as well. Yeah. There will be more. You won't be the first person to have asked them this. And if you have that partnership with them, be willing to ask the questions.
Yeah, I think that's probably another podcast in itself, isn't it? Yeah. Just some of the questions and the controls around it all. I guess getting to the crux of it, the use cases, you mentioned proof of concept earlier, Jaci, and I guess the outcome of the conversations that we're having hopefully would be of benefit to the extent that people are able to recognise and benefit from AI and its processes and its output. Sean, you've a career spanning sort of decades in the data space, coupled with all the automation experience that you've got and seen. What would you view as some of the, thinking about finance processes in particular, some of the best uses of automation? And it'd be good to come on and chat about what you've seen work really well in terms of finance processes as well, and potentially what you've seen not work quite so well. But in terms of automation, like in terms of finance processes that have been embraced, what have you seen work the best, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I mean, I'm very data centric. I think that ability to merge data across different systems, for example, that obviously very manual processes, generally Excel's seen as a both a data extraction tool, a merging tool, a data analysis tool. So those types of things. I think that ability to extract the right data from your various systems, merge it with other data, and then obviously apply the kind of processes that you want, for analysis, for recons, for planning, those types of things. I think it's still got huge opportunities to exist. I've seen some really good case studies on that. And I think even as a smaller firm, you can still apply those types of thinking because you've still got lots of different sources of data, for example. So I still think that's a huge time saver. It helps with data accuracy as well. And then I think obviously if you've got that data compiled into one place, then you can actually start applying the AI and get some different insights from it. So I still think that's a huge opportunity for us. So.
And in terms of the member network, some successes around workflows in particular that you've seen, like generally what sort of feedback are you getting?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it varies across obviously the different personas we've got there. You can imagine audit, that works really well. We're seeing huge improvements in being able to collect data from the clients, for example. Some of it's automated now, and it's more, instead of one-off batches, we're getting more continual feeds, for example. So that there's big opportunities there, for example, as well. So that's the main case studies we're seeing through. But as I say, there are other examples as well on that front. So.
Yeah, a place where people can go, because I'm always quite hesitant to kind of say like, this is a brilliant use case, or this is a brilliant use case, because finance or finance professionals and accountants, although it's one term, what people do is so incredibly different and vast and perspectives and things.
Great point.
So it's often kind of like you would say an example that for maybe like one population of finance, it would be like, that's brilliant, that's exactly what I want. But then for others, they're like, wouldn't be as much of interest to them. So. The one resource that I think I found quite useful in the past as well. So Microsoft, I'm trying to remember what the name of it is. They've made available, it's like a catalog or a library of use cases in industries, which includes, and there's like a finance accountancy kind of thing in there, and they kind of give almost like use cases of how they've seen people use it as well. And it's quite nice because, one of the ones I can remember they once had was the process of writing, like a report of some description, and then kind of take you through the process of, I get the data, there's this analysis done, there's a summarization, there's a brainstorming, there's the writing the report, there's then someone reviewing it, but they kind of in each bit, they're like, this is how you could have applied. And you use these things. Now that's from an individual's perspective, but they also make available kind of larger global type end-to-end processes and how you could use some of these things. So if you're looking for some inspiration or that kind of thing, I know that Microsoft have one. I'm sure that every other provider.
Google came out with one recently as well. Yeah.
So have a look at those ones. Like I think especially the bigger providers. Now clearly they do give it from the lens of their product.
Of course.
But I think look at it from the perspective of what's the principle of what the art of the possible is as well.
Yeah, we'll link them up for people in the description. We'll find them. That seems like really worthwhile reading. Jacci, you've had, I guess, direct experience of from sort of starting point through to evolution and a lot of adoption throughout NatWest, and the nature of the role that you've had, or roles, excuse me, that you've had there. How did your involvement in, I guess, AI in particular sort of evolve? Going back to that point about sort of leadership versus sort of individual proactivity, did you put your hand up and say, I'd like to be involved in that? And I guess I'm thinking of how the platform, the AI Enabler platform, and your involvement as Finance AI Lead actually has evolved, because I imagine that journey is one that quite a few people are about to go on.
Yeah, so I feel like for when it comes to this journey in particular as well, a couple of years ago, I remember it was wet and it was raining, it was really dark, and I had this challenge I've put for myself. I think the challenge was I had to walk 1 million steps within a certain period of time. So every day I had to have a quota of like 12,000 steps, and I was out walking in the rain listening to a podcast, and it must have been about 4 weeks or so after they actually released ChatGPT. I remember listening to this podcast and they started describing this thing, and it honestly felt like a lightning had struck me and kind of just went straight through me, because I think it dawned on me the implication of what they were saying, of what this thing could do. And I remember standing in the rain, made an account, and had my first go. And it, I think people often maybe forget what that very first experience might have been like. Like, it did feel like, black magic. It's like, this should not be able to do this. Yeah. And I think for me, that in that moment, I could almost and I remember texting a friend of mine saying, you need to look at this. This is going to do what the internet did to the industry, is what I kind of felt. It's that size of change, which I think that's kind of what we're kind of living through now. So,
and if it's broadcastable, can you remember what the initial prompt was? Your very first
one? I could probably go back and I can't even remember. I wish I could say it was something smart like Hello World or something like that. But I think, and I can actually remember that next day, my line manager, I just would not stop peppering her, saying, we need to look at this. Like, this is something that we really need. And anyone and everyone that would listen to me, I just kind of, I think I bored them pretty quickly. But being that kind of, I suppose, dogged in determination of, this is something that we really have to pay attention to. Mm-hmm. And I think the thing I was very fortunate with as well is that NatWest very, very early on. So I think ChatGPT was released, was it in the November or December?
Yeah, it was that time.
Yeah, and it was by, within a couple of weeks, it already had the kind of the AI pro. So actually, probably should mention NatWest has been doing AI for decades, before this anyway, but they then had a dedicated program set up and running quite quickly. And they looked for representatives from all the different parts of the business, finance being one of them. And I think everyone's just kind of like, well, what is this thing? There's that guy going, shut up about it. Let's just get him involved. And yeah, just the rest is history in some respects in that. But I think just being involved early on, and I think especially in the early years, it was we were probably in quite a theoretical space. And it was always the kind of the art of the possible. Theoretically, you could do this. But from a personal perspective, it was about looking at, theoretically, I can see this is where it's going. But what are some of the problems or things that we could see coming? So from the very early stage, for me, it was, problem number one is, this thing is out in the loose, in the wild, in the public domain. In especially larger regulated organizations, the challenge that we often have is the technology and capability that you have available outside of work is always far ahead, because and I think social media is kind of actually kind of fueled a bit of that as well, because in your personal life, as soon you tend to only really become aware of these things becoming available when they are pushed out mass market, and then you think, oh, how can I apply this to work? But the risk or the challenge that initially posed was, we are probably seeing this kind of shadow industry in our organizations where people are saying, oh, do you know, I wish I could just chat GPT this, and then I'll email out, I'll get it to do something, and I'll email back in whatever my thing is. So the risk that posed very early on, I think it was even like in the March of the following year, I started pitching this idea of, we've got private instances of these models that we already have access to. Let's try and get something that we can control and manage and maintain, and kind of give controlled access out. And I just kind of pitched the idea to anyone who would listen. A lot of slides, a lot of kind of simulated kind of presentations and Excel spreadsheets that could simulate the experience, just to kind of get people bought in to the concept. And I think, again, for me, a big part of that journey was working. And it's funny because as part of this whole AI journey, the biggest learning and the biggest experience I've had isn't actually about the technology. It's been about the people I've worked with, and a really unique thing. And I think now, and I assume it's like this for most organizations, but I can definitely say this for NatWest. It's been the most collegiate thing I've ever been involved with.
That's excellent.
Where, you know, it's about looking at, well, what can we do for the collective benefit, and how we can work together in doing this, as opposed to, this is mine, I'm doing it, not invented here. And to be honest, by working together like that and looking at the problem, what was the initial problem, finding a solution, it then kind of very rapidly started evolving into, well, I've got access to this stuff, but then what are some of the byproducts of that? So just because you've got access to it, how do you make sure that people are using it safely and appropriately, working with the ethics guys, working with the kind of governance and security guys. And then also early on, there were, I think in the industry, it was kind of death by proof of concept, where everyone was running a proof of concept. But the implication of that was, and still is to some degree in some organizations, is when you run a proof of concept, that is a drain on your time, it's a drain on your resource, there's an opportunity cost on it. But you also can quite quickly run into a scenario where you've almost like got a forest of saplings, but what you actually need are strong trees. So how do you kind of identify the things that you go after? So it was about giving that environment where you could very quick, very low cost, at low risk, run a proof of concept and identify if this is something you carry on with or not. But again, that only came through by working with people to understand what is the operational way of doing this, kind of what are the things that we really want to go after, and I can give it to people in a kind of a safe manner as well. And I think from trying to bring this back to kind of the finance accountancy side of it, if I didn't have the understanding of how business operates that I really gained through my experience doing, my chartered accountancy qualifications, doing audits, auditing businesses end to end, working in business recovery services and insolvencies, understanding why businesses fail and operationally how they should work. If I didn't have that understanding, I didn't think I would have been able to actually get people's buy-in as well. So, and again, it came down to working with people and being willing to work with them.
Can I touch on something you said though? How do we manage the risk of GenAI not becoming the Excel of the future, the shadow IT of the future? Because let's be honest, we haven't. I mean, Excel is prevalent. It's such a brilliant tool, but actually it's the worst tool because you can do everything and you can't take things to production and all these types of things. And there's a risk that generative AI becomes the Excel because it's going to be even more powerful than Excel.
But it's on steroids.
Yeah, exactly.
The view I've got this image in my mind of, Excel would have been like, I want to get from point A to point B, so I can't get a driving license, so I'll get a bicycle. So there's like loads and loads of bikes all over the place. But with generative AI, it's almost like putting a Rolls-Royce engine on a bicycle, and the thing's going to buckle, but it will do its thing and it will seem impressive. But I think that's, to be honest, that is something where I can't profess to have all the answers on not that I've got all the answers to anything I've said today, but I think it's a really valid point, and I think a lot of organizations need to kind of be quite upfront to this. So that kind of explosion of end user developed application
that's it.
And that's, again, I think I've mentioned earlier, I feel like the generative AI adoption bit is putting a spotlight on pre-existing problems. So the Excel, and I know Excel gets a bad rap. I'm personally, I quite like Excel. I'm a fan.
It's a brilliant
It can do some amazing things.
No, exactly.
But you almost whispered that.
Yeah, I know.
I think that's the problem. It is such a good tool, but it just then takes over, and you can basically do almost anything you want around data.
But see, for me, that then comes back down to what is the operating model and the organizational design, because. If you are using, and like this, like I know that a lot of organizations, and I know this from my auditing days, I know this from, kind of friends who work in different industries as well. There are a lot of organizations that have a huge reliance on, macros and Excels and copy paste and all this kind of stuff. But, and it tends to be people being like, I've got a problem, I'll make it like a tactical thing. That then ends up becoming the strategic thing. So that's a systemic problem, which the use of generative AI is going to make even more pronounced. So, we need to find ways of actually cracking that problem. But again, for me, it comes back down to what is the end-to-end process that people are running.
Yeah.
If your process is deficient or inefficient, then you're going to have the need for things to plug it, which then become dependencies, which tends, up until quite recently, in the accounting sense, because it tends to be numbers, it was Excel. And then it comes down to operator proficiency of how well that Excel is made or not made. So
yeah, and I think there are good analogies to, you mentioned the software world, which here's a development sandbox environment. We'll take it through to end user testing, and then we'll put it into production, and therefore you have a good controls, you have good change management, a support model. You're not reliant on when Jimmy goes off on holiday, and those types of things. And I think there's learnings from that world around. Even, it doesn't matter if it's Excel or something. If something's an important model and it's got higher risks and it's got big impacts, how do you put the right support model around it? And it doesn't matter if it's Excel, doesn't matter if it's an agent, doesn't matter if it's W&Ai.
I think probably one thing worth mentioning as well is if purely from, I suppose from a process, but also from an AI perspective, if you in every organization, there needs to be a clear view of what meets the kind of high level, the water level mark of this is a use case that needs kind of more control over.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And that might be kind of for AI or not AI. So you'd want things, for example, like, do your end-to-end processes have a process owner?
Yeah.
Who is, the global process owner, whatever you want to call it, that kind of has responsibility for the end-to-end completion of it. And then the individual, and often what happens, so if you think about like, I don't know, your statutory accounts. Now your statutory accounts are, and the publication of them, they are dependent on multiple processes and steps that kind of feed into that in the kind of the accounting sense. Now, each part of that, balance sheet substantiation, that would be one, or, bank account reconciliations, cash reconciliation, all that kind of stuff. Now, they would have, again, kind of like almost strings of processes. So if you don't have a process owner over those things, that's something that you need to have. But then if you're trying to plug the gap, so with an Excel, let's say in the past, what we probably should have been doing up until this point is the process owner should be aware of how the process works. And if you want to add something to that process or change something to that process, you should get business process owner kind of oversight and approval. Now, in the space of, or it's classified as, I think the common phrase now is low code or no code tooling. So, Microsoft got a thing called Power Platform. There's one called Alteryx is another one. There kind of loads of these tools where you can do what traditionally would have been kind of a robotics or kind of you need a proficient operator, like a technical operator to build them. But you can build these things now. And a lot of these generative AI tools are actually falling into that kind of low code or no code. So I describe what I want and it will do it. And I can build automations that are actually incredibly powerful and they can run, just with a click of a switch or a triggered event. Now, once you reach that kind of stage, you are kind of overlapping more into that kind of software engineering-esque type thing where you need to kind of have other disciplines. So I build this thing, I test this thing, I'm comfortable it's working, I get someone to review it, I now deploy it and then I use it. But as part of all of that, again, you need business oversight, business buy-in. Now, the bit that people probably don't do as much of at the moment, and I'll probably, like often I see people kind of rolling their eyes when I mention this, but model governance and model risk becomes quite important as well. So I'm using a generative AI model to support this process. Model governance looks at the so in the car example I gave a while ago about the evaluation, is the thing still doing what it should be doing? Model governance will kind of help you give the structure of how you do that, but then also, especially when we look at kind of AI governance, there's a really important aspect as well of having a register of models that you use, so you can understand the risk that these things have as well. So and a lot of regulated industries, that has been a mandatory or kind of regulatory requirement for decades. So have a model risk register. So you'd want to have a means of capturing at a kind of a high level what are the models that you're using and which processes are relying on some of these kind of AI components, or what's your control tower that sits over it. Now, I appreciate it probably seems quite grandiose, but I cannot stress enough the importance of that kind of thing. So if you're in a large organization and you've got kind of group or organizational wide available AI models, a lot of these AI models have deprecation dates where they say this model will no longer be available on X date.
Okay.
Now, if you switch from model A to model B, it is almost like switching from personality A to personality B.
Okay.
These things can respond completely differently, and you need to bear that in mind. So if you've got a process that relies, and just to be aware, this applies as well to vendor provided solutions as well.
Okay.
So if their underlying model changes, it could fundamentally change the way that your thing responds. And you need to bear that in mind. And that's why the evaluation becomes so important, because if you needed to respond in a different specific format or comply to specific rules, it could start ignoring the rules. It could interpret the rules differently. So you could quite quickly go from having a whole bunch of, like 1 or 2 UDAs using Gen AI to then having tens of thousands. You need to be able to quite quickly identify what is the scale of the impact if an underlying model changes, and how do you fix and resolve those ones as well. So not to kind of leave it on a downer, but just to be aware that there's a real risk. And actually over the last couple of years, you initially had most organizations, when ChatGPT first came out, GPT 3.5 was the kind of the initial model. It was the cheapest one at that stage. GPT-4 came along, but that was like monumentally more expensive. So people tended towards 3.5. So they built whole processes relying on that. GPT 3.5 then kind of started hitting decommissioning. More cheaper models became available, but the switch over for some people was incredibly painful. And you're seeing that now as well with, and again, I'm referring here only to the OpenAI models. Other model providers are available. But I think you do see when people then start switching from 4 to 4.1 to the 5 models, and now 5.1, 5.2, they can behave very differently as well. So just bear that in mind if you are building end-to-end processes using large language models.
And to your point about moving on from the downer, hopefully finish with some positive examples. I mean, in terms of the best use cases that you've seen, I guess at NatWest in particular, through the development, and it would seem from what you said that there's been a huge amount of adoption, but thinking about the biggest impact and I guess the best utilisation, generally speaking, like what have you seen working well?
So I think it's interesting. If I look at it first from like an individual perspective, people who are willing to be that lifelong learner and willing to experiment in a safe environment, they've been the ones that I found have had the biggest benefit, quickest.
Yeah, okay.
So I think but then also they've applied it in a way that makes sense. They've applied so there's a specific individual that I'm thinking of actually at work, and I won't say the name to embarrass them, but
I'll hopefully get them on in the future.
So what they've done is they've taken a process that they were running, or a kind of work that they were doing, and they're very much kind of thinking of, in the context of what is important for this, using these AI assistive tools to kind of run and improve that process. The underlying core outcome has not changed, but the way that they approach it has fundamentally changed. And when they did that one thing, they then thought, well, actually, I can see how this could be used to affect and support someone else. So I'm actually going to go and tell them, and then help support them in doing that.
Brilliant.
And then it's that kind of
compounding effect.
Yeah, and I think where I've probably seen the greatest success of adoption and rollout is where it has been localized and specific to what people are doing. Because again, that thing I said earlier about like the use cases, if I don't know, give an example of something quite specific, a lot of people would be just like, well, actually that doesn't already apply to me, so I switch off.
Yeah.
But if you're given an example or could see something practical in your day-to-day, that's a huge difference. So having that kind of localized, organic, context-specific, kind of examples and growth and learning, I think that's where you see the biggest kind of depth of adoption. Because you don't just, we want to move away from the superficial stuff of, oh, I can summarize this email. Oh, isn't that great?
Yeah.
Oh, I can write this email. Isn't that great? But it's more, how can it make you do something you couldn't actually do before as well, or make you operate, a lot quicker.
And sorry, Sean.
No, I was just going to add to that a really practical example that we're seeing more of with our members and also with ICAST staff is it's a really simple one. Is that ability to take language, conversations, meetings, those types of things, quite quickly summarize them, but then obviously embellish them with the documents there or the analysis and move that forward really quickly.
Yeah.
So actually that's, imagine if you're, obviously if you're a small business, I'll have a lot of interactions with clients.
Yeah.
You somehow got to write these minutes up, those types of things. I know you can summarize the minutes, but you can make them more structured and more specific to that.
Yeah.
And then, as I say, you can add actual real life, the data associated with that and move that forward. So you can take that first part of the process, which may take you days to respond.
Yeah.
You can be responding within half an hour to that, and you move that process along, and then obviously that allows you time to do the deeper analysis and those types of things. But I think it's a revelation, and I think the other revelation, not only just that interactions, the revelation of actually, if you've got an idea or you want to do something, turning that into speech, turning that into a transcript, and moving forward with that. I think, as I say, we're getting powerful. A huge amount. It's really powerful. Or for example, I'll give you an example like our annual reviews.
Yeah.
As opposed to people taking weeks to do the annual reviews and then going, right, okay, I need to update this, I'm up to update that. Basically, they're talking through their year they've had. They're given examples and they're quite quickly, obviously we can use Copilot to summarize the things they've done, but they're talking through that with them. They're talking maybe 15 minutes, 30 minutes. They're summarising that quickly. So something that would have taken weeks, it's literally taken half an hour. And I think that's been a really practical example for a lot of people to go, wow, this is something quite different.
Yeah.
And is there a particular method in place to sort of calculate ROI of that type that you've seen, Jaci? I mean, I would assume that the product, well, you could argue that there would be quite visible productivity benefits, time-saving benefits. Calculating ROI, might be slightly harder. However, if somebody's thinking of investing in AI in that regard, any insight into methods of ROI?
So I would say my experience being that it can be difficult to calculate ROI, especially with generalized assistive versions, because it tends to be the phrase often uses, it's kind of like fingers and toes. So I gain 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 3 minutes there. So it's kind of like overall you're seeing an efficiency gain, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can kind of completely remove a process or remove something, because it's kind of because actually it's almost like the example of was it used to be Team Sky or was not Team Ineos?
Yeah.
So the thing that they did of like the marginal gains, like just shaving off ounces here, sleeping better, air conditioned bus, all that kind of stuff, and overall that then had that kind of overall impact of them, winning the Tour de France as many times as they did and becoming a dominant force at that time. And I think the kind of at the stage we're at the moment with a lot of these kind of assistive technologies, the general assistive technologies, it's the more marginal gain piece of it.
Yeah.
Where I think you would see the bigger kind of or clearer, more defined return on investment is where these things are systemically incorporated into processes. Again, taking into account everything else that we've said about kind of governance process, doing it all correctly, but that then fundamentally transform or reinvent or scale how a process is done, because then you have more measurable outcomes. So I think in order to have clear return on investment, you need very clear, measurable outcomes of what it is that you're trying to achieve. So be it, measurable, time reduction or speed to delivery or, quality of output. But in order to do that, you need the measure before you start as well. So, so I suppose my advice would be is that if you want clear return on investment, and if this is not for generalized assistive things, it's about in the thing that you're trying to do, understanding, well, what is it today? What is it that you want it to get to? And then trying to understand the cost of investment to do this. Because I think that's a thing that people do need to bear in mind as well. To implement these things, there is a cost of implementation, and then there's a cost of usage, but then also a cost of maintenance. And you do need to look at the cost of all of those against what is the cost outcome or the benefit, if it's a cost play that you're trying to do, obviously. But the benefit of the cost you need to, but that's traditional accountancy. There's nothing new in this space, but those things again, they still all apply.
Fascinating. Yeah, really, really fantastic insight from you both. I guess looking just to end with a bit of conversation around jobs. There's quite a lot of discussion around jobs being lost. Maybe not in the here and now, but what might the future of the jobs in the skills market be, as it particularly relates to AI as a sort of a knock-on impact to recruitment, of course. From how you've both described it, it would seem that, for example, a business, a small business doing its statutory reporting process, going through its audit, it would seem that that's a long way, as we start about this today, it would seem that it's a long way from that being fully automated and sort of AI driven. And it seems more about the adoption of AI skills and the usage of it in your role to enhance your role, but not replacing your expertise and that sort of deep specialism that you talked about. It would seem that that's what the immediate horizon is, as opposed to sort of lots and lots of roles being lost for accountants and finance professionals. Would you echo that?
I think so. I think there's learnings from, let's be honest, this is potentially going to be as big as the internet or mobile technology, and if you think about that in terms of, there might have been disruption to start with, but look at what it's created. There are whole industries now around the internet. A digital world now exists. Look, we can't even go anywhere without our phones and our apps and things like that. So it's created a whole new industry and products and all those types of things. And I think this has the potential to go, a similar way. There obviously there's going to be ups and downs, and the pendulum's going to swing back and forth in terms of what organisations are going to do. And Jaci spoke about this recently, something else, and there's a few books on it, I think, around, jobs as we know them will change. Sure, some bits will become automated, obviously put the focus on the judgment we've mentioned, but new roles will come in that we don't even know exist at the moment in accountancy, for example. So I think we're, as I said before, I think accountants are well placed. They're already quite data literate. They're already, using processes. They're already digitally aware. So I think they're primed to really take advantage of this. Think about the lifelong learning and those types of things. I think it's hard for us to predict at the moment where that, the new roles and things are going to come out with. But that's kind of my stance, and I think that's where the research is coming out at the moment as well. So.
There's I think the problem was kind of bringing to life. So one of the kind of fathers of kind of AI is a guy called W&Ai, I remember he once he did this presentation and he held up an iPhone, and he was saying, well, when the very first iPhone came out, the very first app that anyone ever made was the flashlight. And it was actually a bug that someone identified on the phone, which was it was a flaw or a bug or whatever you want to call it, but where if you triggered a certain event, then what is supposed to be the flashlight or the flash in the camera would persistently stay on.
Okay.
So initially the industry of applications or mobile applications was people were trying to do things to augment the physical phone. So I can do stuff with the device, physical device. Yeah. But if you kind of consider where the ecosystem or the commerce that has come out of apps, you know, as a concept, as a thing, you know, pay for parking with your phone, you do mobile banking with your phone, you can order food, you can order an Uber, you know, get an Airbnb, whatever you want. There's like a whole industry that's kind of sprung out of it. And my perspective is that I feel that we're still probably very much at the stage now of the flashlight as an app. You know, what this industry is going to become, the doors it's going to open, I think that's yet to be really revealed and kind of truly understood, which for me is a positive thing. So there's a whole lot of stuff that you can do. Now, I feel for people who are working, you've probably got two groups. So you've got people who've been in work for a long time, and you've got people who are either coming into work or new into work. And I think the perspectives they're going to have is going to be quite different. So you're going to have people who've been, you know, working for, 15, 20 years plus. They have a very unique position because they have a depth of understanding of how things work.
Yeah.
You know, that people who are new into work won't have. And they'll be able to identify if they use these things appropriately, they can identify quite quickly where these things are wrong, or how to maximize the way that you use it, because you have that understanding of how to direct what it should do. So, but then for people who are new into work, they are probably a little bit more technically averse of how to actually use it and what these things can be used for. So it's about playing into wherever you are in that scale. And that's kind of for the here and now. But equally, when I look at the future, and kind of I think it's the whole question of job displacement. So, you know, am I going to lose my job?
Yeah.
What's going to happen to the industry? So Tim Harford, he wrote a very good article, this is maybe 2 years ago now, for the Financial Times, and it was specifically about AI, but he had this example of when word processing in Excel first was released, and it was actually specific, I'm pretty sure it was specifically about the accounting practice that he focused on, and it was something like, you know, because before Excel, people were literally, so I'm from South Africa, and a ledger would be the book, you know, the book. You know, it's like, you know, you have literally a book, and you have like, you know, one would be the general ledger, one would be, you know, whatever it would be. And you would write your debits and credits like that. But then when accounting software and all these things came on, there were a whole kind of sways of the industry of like, oh, I'm going to lose my job because this thing will do it.
Yeah.
And I think the reality was, I can't remember the exact numbers, but there were hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands, well, there was definitely in the thousands. I can't remember if it was tens or hundreds. I think it was in the hundreds of thousands of people who, as a result of that, those jobs no longer existed. However, the number of jobs that were created as a result of that was, you know, exponentially larger. So, and it's not to say that people were, oh, these jobs are lost, therefore I've lost my job. But it was more, what you did before is no longer there, but what you can do now with those same skills, there's a lot more of that, which actually ended up creating, you know, a lot more work. And, you know, I'm hopeful that that's what could happen in the space.
Yeah.
But, massive but, if you want to be part of that, you do need to engage.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't engage and if you're passive on the sideline, you know, if it's the whole thing of like, if you don't ask, if you don't get, if you're not engaged, if you're not at the races, you're not gonna, you won't stand a chance as it is. So, and again, that kind of loops back all the way to be a lifelong learner, be a persistent learner, be engaged with these topics. Don't just stick your head in the sand.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean you need to be an AI expert. Just be informed. That's all.
Yeah.
Perfect way to end, I think, Jaci. Yeah, so sort of lean in with sort of caution and responsibility at its core. Fantastic speaking to you both, like fascinating insight. I feel so fortunate to have you two in particular here. I think you're as well versed as anybody to chat about this as a subject matter, and really grateful for your time. It's been great to chat to you both. Thanks very much.
Thanks for the insight.
That brings this episode to a close. Thanks very much for listening. We really hope that you enjoyed W&Ai. And if so, please feel free to like and subscribe. We have some excellent guests lined up, and we look forward to sharing more content with you. At W&A, we recruit with impact. We use our expertise to recruit accountancy and finance talent and help build finance teams across Scotland and beyond. We truly value the human aspect of our role, and building lasting relationships is at the heart of our success. For more information, please visit www.wilkinsonandassociates.co.uk. That's www.wilkinsonandassociates.co.uk. Thanks for listening.